Good morning and happy Thanksgiving. If you're watching this on Thanksgiving morning, perhaps you can smell a turkey cooking in your oven, or perhaps you're making plans to see a few family members anyway later on today. In any event, I hope you are able to enjoy at least some of the 3 F's of Thanksgiving: food, family, and football. But within reason in terms of numbers of people gathered. And if not this year, at least they'll be next year. So happy Thanksgiving to you today. In this meditation, I want to discuss with you not so much Thanksgiving Day, but the activity behind Thanksgiving, the reason for Thanksgiving Day, and that is the practice of giving thanks. The practice of giving thanks. I want to make 2 points about this practice and then tell you a story as well. So the first point is that the practice of giving thanks actually puts us right with God, as the old roadside sign used to say, get right with God. The practice of giving thanks to God accomplishes that. It puts us right with God and indeed with all of creation. We are creatures. We are part of the created order. And when we give thanks to God for our many blessings, for life itself, then we acknowledge our place in creation and we acknowledge God's place. And so we get right with God by giving thanks. Another way of saying the same thing is that the practice of giving thanks helps us avoid the state of sin. That's with a capital S, the state of sin, not small s, sins, but the state of sin. This state, fundamental to it, is that we attempt to put ourselves in God's place. When we are in the state of sin, when we are apart from God, if you will, or at least attempt to be apart from God, the reason is that we try to put ourselves in God's place. That's the state of sin. And by acknowledging God through giving thanks to God, then we put ourselves in the right place and we avoid the state of sin. Now, the second point comes from St. Paul. In one of his letters, he writes, "Give thanks for all things." In fact, this is a fairly prominent theme in St. Paul's letters. Give thanks for all things. And as I read that instruction, that direction, I find myself in a sense of not being able to do that. I cannot give thanks for all things. There are some things about which I am not thankful. But by looking more carefully at what St. Paul writes and by imagining what he means, I think that St. Paul has in mind that there is nothing in this life that doesn't have some aspect to it, something related to that thing, which we cannot give thanks for. So if I've lost a loved one, a family member, I cannot give thanks for that loss, but I can eventually give thanks for the time shared and the love we experienced together, the good memories. I can give thanks for that. In the midst of this nightmare of COVID, I cannot give thanks for that, but I can give thanks for St. Stephen's, for this community of faith, the staff and the clergy in particular, who have worked hard to give us ways to stay connected, to encourage us in this part of life's journey which takes us through these times. And so while I cannot give thanks for COVID itself, certainly, I can give thanks to some aspects, some tangential realities, like a community of faith, like St. Stephen's, which gives me reason to be thankful. So St. Paul says and writes, "Give thanks for all things." And while I cannot accomplish that literally, I can find reasons to give thanks about even times of pain and hardship, of discouragement and even despair. And when I do, when I find something for which to give thanks, then I gain some sense of control over the tragedy or hardship or pain which otherwise would be overwhelming. So give thanks for all things, St. Paul writes, and I at least attempt to accomplish, and I commend to you as well. So the story I want to relate to you involves my mom, the last months of her life. Mother was always one who was in charge of things, and she enjoyed being in charge of things. She was very competent at many things, and she was able to go about her everyday life and take on large projects very successfully. She was a very competent woman. After a hospitalization, however, she was discharged to an assisted living facility, and she stayed there, remained there until she died. And she didn't like that very much, to say the least. She was quite unhappy, and she snapped at her caregivers, her nurses. She was not very gracious at all, because she was upset and mad about the circumstances in which she found herself. And so the nurses and caregivers, along with family and friends, suffered along with her because she was so unhappy. After weeks, she gradually came to acknowledge and accept her situation. And along with this, gratitude towards those who were supporting her began to be a part of her everyday life. She was thankful and expressed that thanks to the nurses and the caregivers. And those of us, family and friends who visited, recognized this change. You see, gratitude is contagious. And so we began to see this change, and we too were grateful for it. And the visits were lighter, much more pleasant. And so I reached the point of being grateful, not for Mom's illness, certainly, not for her declining health, but grateful that she had come to this point in life where her own sense of gratitude was clear, and she was a happier person as a result. And I am very grateful for that. And so on this Thanksgiving Day, I want to commend to you the practice of giving thanks, not just on the day, but as a way of life. The practice of giving thanks as a way of life puts us right with God. This practice of giving thanks also means that we are more able to, if not control, at least deal with tragedy and hardship, pain, disappointment if we can give thanks for some aspect of those experiences, which then in turn gives us a sense of control over those things rather than letting them overwhelm us completely. And giving thanks, the practice of giving thanks also is contagious. And we experience not only the practice of giving thanks ourselves, but we share that with others, and the whole situation is made more presentable, more livable for all of us who are in this journey together. And so today, on Thanksgiving Day, I commend to you the practice of giving thanks. Amen.